I agreed to the DNA test on a Tuesday afternoon in April, sitting in Harold Whitman's office on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like leather and old money. The kind of place where even the silence had been inherited. Harold had known me since I was 7. He'd been at birthday parties, graduations, every major family event that required witness or documentation. Now he sat across from me with his hands folded on a mahogany desk, reading aloud from my father's will in the same measured tone he might use to explain a parking ticket. The inheritance described in Section 7, Item C, including controlling shares of Monroe Biomedical Systems and liquid assets totaling approximately $6.3 million, shall transfer to Isabel Catherine Monroe, provided she submits to DNA verification confirming biological paternity within 60 days of this reading. Charlotte laughed. Not a real laugh, the kind she used in her Instagram stories when she wanted to seem relatable. "This is insane," as she said, looking at our mother. "Tell him this is insane." Evelyn sat perfectly still in her chair, knees together, hands in her lap. She wore a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "It's certainly unusual," as she said quietly. "Thomas could be meticulous." Meticulous. That was the word she always used. Not paranoid. Not cruel. Meticulous. I looked at the document in front of me. My father's signature was at the bottom, witnessed and notarized 6 months before his death. He'd had time to think about this. Time to reconsider. Time to choose differently. He hadn't. Can he do this? Charlotte asked Harold. Can he just humiliate her like this? Make her prove she's his daughter in front of everyone? The provision is legally enforceable, Harold said. He looked at me, not Charlotte. You have 60 days to comply or decline. If you decline, the assets revert to the estate and will be distributed according to the alternate provisions outlined in Section 8. What happens in Section 8? I asked. Charitable distribution. Medical research foundations, primarily. So my choices were, submit to my dead father's final demand for proof, or let $10 million go to organizations that would name conference rooms after him. Isabel. My mother's voice was soft, practiced. You don't have to do this. It's demeaning. Your father was ill toward the end, not physically, but mentally. This fixation on verification, on documentation, it wasn't rational. He seemed pretty rational when he restructured the company last year, I said. That was different. How? She didn't answer. Charlotte was typing something on her phone, her jaw tight. I looked at Harold. What do I need to do? Isabel. No. Charlotte's voice had an edge now. Think about what this means. For all of us. The press, the family, the foundation. Do you know what people will say? I imagine they'll say I took a DNA test. They'll say Dad didn't trust you. That there was something wrong. That you weren't really his daughter. Maybe that's what he thought. The room went very quiet. Evelyn stood up, smoothing her skirt. Let's not make any hasty decisions. We should discuss this as a family, privately. Harold, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. Harold looked at me. I nodded. He handed me a business card with a lab's information printed on the back. Call them directly, he said. They're expecting you. I grew up in a house where evidence mattered more than feeling. My father was a surgeon. He believed in what could be measured: blood pressure, oxygen saturation, cardiac output. He performed over 4,000 open-heart surgeries in his career. He published 73 peer-reviewed papers. He founded Monroe Biomedical Systems when I was 9, pioneering a new generation of arterial stents that reduced post-surgical complications by 42%. He was brilliant. Everyone said so. He was also the kind of father who would stand in the doorway of my bedroom while I did homework and say nothing, just watch, as if looking for errors in real time. When I was 12, I won a regional history competition. I'd written a paper on archival preservation methods during the Civil War. My teacher called it exceptionally mature. I came home with a certificate and a $50 savings bond. My father looked at the certificate for a long time. "Did anyone help you?" he asked. "No. Your teacher didn't suggest the topic?" "I chose it myself." He handed the certificate back to me. "Good," he said. Then he went upstairs to his office and closed the door. Charlotte got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a briefcase for my college graduation. My mother said he was proud of me, that he just didn't know how to show it. But I think he did know. I think he chose not to. I called the lab the next morning from my office at the university. I worked in the B-Neck Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale, one of the most secure archival facilities in the country. Scholars came from around the world to access our collections. My job was to authenticate documents, verify provenance, trace ownership. I was good at it. Better than good. I believed in primary sources. In evidence that could withstand scrutiny. So when the woman at the lab asked if I had any questions about the testing process, I said no. I knew how DNA testing worked. I'd authenticated enough historical paternity claims to understand the science. "We'll need a sample from the deceased," she said. "Usually tissue or bone, if available." My father was cremated. There was a pause. "Do you have access to any preserved biological material?" "Medical records sometimes include." He ran a biomedical company. "I'm sure we have something." I called Harold after I hung up. He confirmed that my father had banked blood samples as part of a long-term health study he participated in through Massachusetts General. The samples were still in storage. He'd included authorization for their release in the will. Of course he had. Charlotte called me that night while I was walking home. It was raining, one of those cold April rains that feels personal. "Mom's upset," as she said without preamble. "I know. She thinks you're doing this to punish us." I stopped under an awning outside a closed bookstore. "Punish you for what?" "For being Dad's favorite." I actually laughed. "You think I was Dad's favorite?" "You were the smart one. The serious one. The one he could talk to about work." "He never talked to me about work." "He left you the company, Isabel." "He left me a condition." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I could hear music in the background, the low murmur of voices. She was probably at some gallery opening or restaurant launch. She went to 3 or 4 events a week, documenting everything for her followers. She had 200,000 people who watched her drink green juice and tour historic homes and talk about wellness. "If you do this," as she said finally, "if you actually go through with it, you're going to destroy this family." "The family's already destroyed, Charlotte. We're just pretending it isn't." "That's not fair." "Dad requiring a DNA test isn't fair. But here we are." He was sick. He was paranoid. You can't hold a dead man accountable for. For what? For writing a will while he was completely lucid? For planning this 6 months in advance? I started walking again. He meant this, Charlotte. Every word. Then he was an asshole. Yes, I said. He was. I hung up before she could respond. Rachel Stein found me in the conservation lab 2 days later. Rachel was a research fellow in the history department, technically my colleague, functionally my closest friend. She studied material culture and archival theory. She'd written her dissertation on the politics of historical memory. She set a coffee down on my desk and looked at the documents I was examining. 19th century correspondence. 1840s. Possible forgery. What makes you think it's fake? I pointed to the ink analysis report. The iron gall ink has a chemical profile consistent with modern reproduction. Whoever made this was good, but not good enough. Rachel pulled up a chair. I heard about your father's will. From who? It's a small academic community. Isabel. People talk. I didn't look up from the documents. What are they saying? That it's complicated. That your family is powerful and weird and probably hiding something. Sounds accurate. Rachel leaned back, studying me. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel simultaneously examined and understood. Are you going to do it? The test? Yes. Why? Because I need to know. Even if the answer ruins everything? I finally looked at her. What if the answer fixes everything? You think it will? I think the truth is better than the silence. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay. Then let's be methodical about it. Document everything. Build a timeline. Treat this like a research project, not a family drama. It's both. I know. But you're better at research than drama. She wasn't wrong. The first DNA sample was collected on a Thursday. I went to the lab in downtown New Haven, rolled up my sleeve, and watched a phlebotomist fill 3 vials with my blood. She labeled them carefully, checked my ID twice, and had me initial each vial. Results in 2 weeks, she said. We'll email you a secure link. My father's samples had already been transferred from Mass General's storage facility. According to Harold, they were logged, documented, and chain of custody certified. I thanked the phlebotomist and left. On the way out, I passed a woman with a toddler who was crying about the needle. The mother was calm, reassuring. It's okay, baby. Just a little pinch. You're so brave. I wondered if my mother had ever said that to me. If she'd ever called me brave. I started researching my father's past that same day. I had access to institutional archives most people didn't. University medical school records, hospital newsletters, donor lists, professional society memberships. I started with his CV, a 30-page document that read like a monument to ambition. He'd completed his residency at Mass General in 1987. From 1988 to 1993, he'd been an attending surgeon while building his private practice. Charlotte was born in 1989. I was born in 1992. I pulled the hospital's staff directories for those years. Then I cross-referenced them with event programs from fundraisers and galas. My mother had been heavily involved in the hospital auxiliary. She chaired the annual benefit 3 years running. In a 1990 gala program, I found a photograph. My mother, 30 years younger, wearing a gold dress and standing next to a man who wasn't my father. The caption read, Evelyn Monroe with Dr. Julian Moreau, visiting fellow from Institut Pasteur. Dr. Moreau was tall, dark-haired, smiling in a way my father never smiled. Confident. Charismatic. I ran his name through the university database. He'd been a cardiothoracic fellow at Mass General from 1987 to 1991, specializing in valve replacement techniques. After his fellowship, he'd returned to France. There were a few scattered publications, then nothing after 1995. I found 3 more photographs of him with my mother. One at a hospital luncheon. One at a medical society dinner. One at a private donor reception at the Monroe House. In the last photo, my mother was laughing. Really laughing, not the polite, practiced smile she used for public events. Her hand was on Morrow's arm. My father was visible in the background, talking to someone else, his back to the camera. I saved all 4 images to an encrypted folder. Rachel helped me build a timeline. We worked in my apartment over Chinese takeout and too much coffee, spreading documents across my dining table like we were preparing for an academic defense. Okay, Rachel said, typing on her laptop. Charlotte was born March 1989. Which means conception would have been June 1988. Morrow arrived in Boston in September 1987, I said, checking the hospital directory. So he was definitely there. Your parents got married in 1986, right? June 1986. Rachel made a note. And you were born in October 1992. Conception around January of that year. I pulled up Morrow's publication record. He was still in Boston in January 1992. He didn't return to France until July. So both timelines overlap. Yes. Rachel sat back, looking at the spread of documents. Isabel. If your father suspected Morrow was Charlotte's father, why wouldn't he just divorce your mother? Because it would have been public. Messy. Thomas Monroe didn't do messy. So he stayed married and just suspected? For 30 years? I think he did more than suspect. I opened my laptop and pulled up the scan pages of my father's journals. I'd found them in his office at the house, filed with his financial records. They were clinical, methodical. Dates and observations. Patterns. Rachel leaned over to read. Unusually distant. Charlotte has JM's eyes. Need to verify. There are pages of this, I said. Years of entries. He documented everything. Every inconsistency. Every time Charlotte did something that reminded him of someone else. Did he ever confront your mother? Not that I can find. I think he just collected evidence. Rachel shook her head slowly. That's fucked up. Yes. And now he's making you do the same thing. Prove yourself. Verify. I guess he figured if he had to live with doubt, so should I. Rachel looked at me for a long moment. You know this might not go the way you think, right? You might be his daughter. Charlotte might not be. That would change everything. I know. It would destroy her. I know that too. The preliminary DNA results came back on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after the sample collection. I was at my desk when the email arrived. Secure link, password protected. My hands were shaking when I typed in the code. The report loaded slowly, page by page. And then, inconclusive. Additional testing recommended. I read it 3 times. Inconclusive didn't mean negative. It meant the markers were ambiguous. It meant something was there, but not clear enough to confirm. I called the lab. This happens sometimes, the geneticist explained. Particularly with older samples or when there are unusual genetic markers. Would recommend a more comprehensive panel, something with higher sensitivity. How long would that take? 3 weeks, possibly 4. But the results would be definitive. Do it, EI said. After I hung up, I sat very still, staring at the email. Inconclusive. I thought about my father, about the way he'd always looked at me like I was a problem he couldn't solve. A variable that didn't fit the equation. I thought about Charlotte, who'd always been so certain of her place in the family. So confident. I thought about my mother, who'd spent 30 years maintaining the fiction that everything was fine. And I thought, what if none of us are who we think we are? Charlotte posted to Instagram that night. It was a carefully composed shot, her sitting by the lake at the family's New Hampshire property, looking contemplative. The caption read, "Is sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us most. Learning to trust myself again. #healing, #boundaries, #truth." The comments were immediate and supportive. You're so brave. Family isn't always blood. We see you. I wondered how many of her followers knew what she was actually talking about. Rachel sent me a screenshot. She's positioning. I know. She's going to make this about her victimhood. Let her. Isabel. If this goes public. It's already public. She made it public. Rachel didn't argue. She knew I was right. My mother called 2 days later and asked me to meet her for lunch. Not at the house. Not anywhere we might be recognized. A quiet French place in Cambridge, the kind of restaurant where politicians had affairs and lawyers made deals. She was already seated when I arrived, at a corner table with a view of the street. She'd ordered sparkling water for both of us. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "You said it was important." She looked tired. Older than she'd looked at the funeral. "I want you to stop this." The testing? All of it. The investigation, the documentation. Rachel Stein asking questions at the hospital archives. Rachel's doing her job. She's doing your bidding. I didn't deny it. My mother folded her hands on the table. "What do you want, Isabel?" "I want to know the truth." The truth about what? About why Dad never looked at me like I was his daughter. Something shifted in her face, just for a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful composure she'd perfected over decades. "Your father was a complicated man," she said. "He had difficulty with intimacy. With emotional expression. That doesn't mean he didn't love you. Love isn't the question. Paternity is. They're the same thing." "No," EI said. "They're really not." The waiter came to take our order. My mother ordered a salad. I ordered the same. Neither of us would eat much of it. When the waiter left, my mother leaned forward slightly. "If you continue down this path, you will destroy this family. Charlotte is fragile right now. She's struggling." With what? With her identity. With her sense of self. She's built her entire life around being a Monroe. If you take that away from her. I'm not taking anything. I'm just asking questions. Questions have consequences. So does silence. My mother looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. "You've always been like him, you know. Your father. Cold. Analytical. Unable to see past the facts to the people underneath." "Maybe that's genetic," EI said. She flinched. I found the rest of my father's documentation that weekend, in a locked file cabinet in his office at the house. Harold had given me the key as part of the estate administration. There were folders for everything: tax returns, property deeds, corporate documents. And then, in the back, a manila folder labeled simply a personal. Inside were letters. Not from my father, to him. Dozens of letters, spanning 3 decades, from Dr. Gerlian Moreau in Paris. They started formally. Professional updates, conference invitations, requests for collaboration. But by the late 1990s, the tone had changed. Thomas, I think often of those years in Boston. Of the friendship we built, the work we shared. I hope you and Evelyn are well. Please give her my regards. And then, from 2003, I saw a photograph of your daughters in the alumni magazine. They're beautiful, both of them. Charlotte especially reminds me of someone, though I cannot place who. I sat on the floor of my father's office, reading letter after letter. There was nothing explicit. Nothing that proved an affair or confirmed paternity. But the subtext was everywhere, in the careful phrasing, the casual mentions of my mother, the observation about Charlotte. Moreau knew. Or suspected. And my father had kept every letter. I took photographs of all of them. Then I put them back exactly as I'd found them. The second round of DNA results came back on a Monday in early May, 4 weeks after I'd submitted the initial sample. I was in the library's conservation vault when the email arrived. I made myself finish cataloguing the manuscript I was working on before I opened it. Then I locked the vault door, sat down at the examination table, and clicked the secure link. The report loaded. 2 pages. Dense with genetic markers and probability percentages and technical language. But the conclusion was simple. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Subject Isabel Monroe is the biological daughter of Thomas Monroe. I read it twice. Then a third time. I was his daughter. After everything, the suspicion, the distance, the will, the condition, I was actually his daughter. I sat in the silence of the vault, surrounded by centuries-old documents, and felt nothing. Or maybe I felt everything, and it just didn't have a name. I called Harold immediately. The results came back. I said, "I'm confirmed." There was a pause. "Congratulations." "Is Charlotte tested yet?" Another pause, longer this time. "Charlotte submitted her sample last week. The results came back on Friday." "And?" "I can't disclose that to you, Isabel. She's entitled to privacy." "Harold." "I'm sorry. If she wants to share the information with you, that's her choice." I hung up and called Charlotte directly. She answered on the first ring. "I already know why you're calling." "Do you want to tell me, or should I guess?" "There's nothing to tell." "Charlotte." "I'm not discussing this with you. Talk to Harold. Or better yet, talk to Mom. This is her mess, not mine." She hung up. I sat very still, thinking. Charlotte already knew her results. Which meant she'd requested expedited processing. Which meant she'd been worried enough to pay for priority testing. Which meant she'd suspected something before the will was even read. Rachel helped me put it together that night. We sat in my apartment with all the evidence spread across the coffee table. Photographs, letters, hospital records, the DNA reports, the will. "Look at the timeline," Rachel said, pointing to her laptop screen. "Charlotte was born in March 1989. Your dad and Moreau were working closely together at that time. There are 3 co-authored papers from late 88 and early 89. So they were friends. Or your father was keeping his enemy close." I looked at the photograph of my mother and Moreau at the 1990 gala. The way she was laughing. The way his hand rested on her waist. If Charlotte got her results on Friday, I said slowly, and she's refusing to talk about it. Then she knows, Rachel finished. She knows she's not his daughter. But she's letting me be the villain. She's letting everyone think I'm destroying the family by demanding proof. Rachel nodded. Because if she admits the truth, her entire identity collapses. The brand, the following, the Monroe legacy, all of it depends on her being Thomas Monroe's daughter. So she's going to fight this. Of course she is. She has everything to lose. I looked at all the evidence we'd assembled. What do I do? You do what you're good at, Rachel said. You document everything. You build an airtight case. And you present it without emotion, without bias. You let the evidence speak for itself. And then you let the truth do what truth does. The confrontation happened 3 days later, in Harold Whitman's office, with all parties present. Harold had called the meeting to clarify outstanding questions regarding the estate distribution, he'd said on the phone. Professional. Neutral. But I knew what it really was. Charlotte arrived first, with a lawyer I didn't recognize, some corporate attorney from a white shoe firm. She looked perfect, as always. Tailored dress, minimal jewelry, makeup that suggested she'd been crying but had pulled herself together. My mother came alone, which surprised me. She sat next to Charlotte but didn't touch her, didn't offer comfort. I arrived last, with Rachel, who'd taken a personal day to be there. Harold cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. We're here to address the provisions of Thomas Monroe's will, specifically the conditional inheritance outlined in Section 7. He looked at me. Isabel, you've completed the required DNA verification? Yes. I slid a copy of the report across the table. I'm confirmed as Dr. Monroe's biological daughter with 99.97% certainty. Charlotte's lawyer started to speak, but Harold held up a hand. Charlotte, you've also undergone voluntary DNA testing? Charlotte looked at her lawyer. He nodded. Yes, as she said quietly. And your results? She didn't answer. Harold opened a folder on his desk. According to the report filed with this office, Charlotte Monroe shares maternal but not paternal DNA with Isabel Monroe. The probability of Thomas Monroe being Charlotte's biological father is effectively 0. The room went absolutely silent. My mother closed her eyes. Charlotte's lawyer said, We're prepared to challenge the legitimacy of the testing methodology, Anne. On what grounds? I asked. He looked at me like I'd interrupted a performance. On the grounds that your father was mentally unfit at the time the will was drafted, that the provisions are punitive and irrational, and that you can't challenge the will without challenging the DNA results, Rachel said calmly. And you can't challenge the DNA results without opening discovery into why Thomas Monroe suspected paternity issues in the first place. Which means subpoenaing hospital records, I continued. Staff directories. Personal correspondence. Event photographs. I pulled out a folder of my own and set it on the table, including evidence of a long-term connection between Evelyn Monroe and Dr. Julian Moreau between 1987 and 1992, the period during which both Charlotte and I were conceived. Charlotte's lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother finally spoke. Put that away, Isabel. Why? Because it's private. Because it's the past. Because it doesn't matter anymore. It mattered to Dad. Your father was paranoid and cruel. Maybe. But he wasn't wrong. The words hung in the air like smoke. Charlotte stood up suddenly. I don't have to listen to this. Yes, you do, I said. Because the will is clear. The inheritance is conditional. I met the condition. You can't. You're enjoying this, as Charlotte said. Her voice was shaking. You're actually enjoying humiliating me. I'm not humiliating you. I'm just stating facts. Facts. She laughed, wild and bitter. You sound just like him. You know that? Cold and clinical and completely incapable of understanding what this means for anyone but yourself. What does it mean, Charlotte? It means I'm not a Monroe. It means everything I've built, everything I am, it's all based on a lie. No, I said quietly. It's based on a choice. Mom's choice. Dad's choice to stay silent. Your choice to build an identity around a name instead of around yourself. She stared at me, and for a moment I saw something real in her face. Something raw and terrified. Then she grabbed her bag and walked out. Her lawyer followed, still protesting. The door closed. Harold looked at my mother. Evelyn? My mother sat very still. Then, finally, she spoke. Julian Morrow was a visiting surgeon at Mass General in the late 80s. He was brilliant. Charming. Very different from Thomas. She paused. We had a brief relationship. A few months. It ended when he returned to France. Did Dad know? I asked. He suspected. Not at first, but later. When Charlotte started to look like someone else. He never confronted me directly. But he changed. Became more distant. More controlling. Did Morrow know about Charlotte? I don't think so. Not at first. But I sent him photographs, over the years. Updates. I think he guessed eventually. Why didn't you just leave? My mother looked at me with something like sadness. Because leaving would have meant admitting what I'd done. And I couldn't do that. Not to your father, not to myself. So I stayed. And I let him suspect. And I let him make us all miserable. And you let him make me question my entire existence. I didn't know he was going to do that. But you didn't stop him. She had no answer for that. The will was executed as written. Harold filed the necessary paperwork. Monroe Biomedical Systems transferred to my control. The liquid assets, $6.3 million, moved into an account in my name. Charlotte contested, briefly. Her lawyers filed a motion. It was denied within a week. The evidence was too strong, the will too clear. She stopped posting on Instagram. Her follower count dropped by 40,000 in a month. A Society columnist wrote a blind item about the old money family drama and disputed inheritances. Nobody named names. Everybody knew. My mother moved to the Connecticut house. We spoke once, briefly, to coordinate the transfer of personal effects. I hope you're happy, as she said on the phone. I'm not, I said. But I'm honest. She hung up. Rachel and I had dinner the night everything was finalized. A quiet place near campus, the kind of restaurant where nobody cared who you were or what your family had done. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it. Like I won something I didn't want. The money? The truth. Rachel sipped her wine. Do you regret it? Going through with everything? No. Even though it destroyed your relationship with Charlotte? With your mother? Those relationships were already destroyed. I just documented it. Rachel smiled, sad and knowing. You're going to be okay, Isabel. I know. What are you going to do now? With the company, the money, all of it? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent so much time focused on the investigation, on proving the truth, that I hadn't thought about what came after. But I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to be like my father, collecting evidence of other people's betrayals, building walls out of suspicion. I didn't want to be like my mother, maintaining a fiction for decades. Choosing reputation over honesty. I didn't want to be like Charlotte, constructing an identity from a name instead of from substance. I wanted to be myself. Completely, unambiguously, without question. I think I'm going to sell the company, I said finally. Set up a foundation for archival preservation. Something that supports truth-telling. Documentation. Historical memory. Rachel raised her glass. That sounds right. We toasted. The wine was good. The restaurant was quiet. Outside, the May evening was turning to dusk, soft and still. I returned to work the following Monday. The conservation vault was exactly as I'd left it, climate-controlled, carefully organized, full of documents that had survived centuries. I had a manuscript to authenticate, a collection of letters from the 1860s, potentially forged. I put on my gloves and opened the archive box. The paper was aged correctly. The ink composition matched the period. The handwriting was consistent across multiple letters. But something was off. A small inconsistency in the postal markings. A date that didn't align with documented historical events. I made notes. Photographed the irregularities. Began building a case for why this manuscript wasn't what it claimed to be. It was careful work. Methodical. The kind of investigation that required patience and precision. The kind of work I was good at. Outside the vault, the world continued, messy and complicated and full of narratives that didn't quite align with truth. But in here, in this room full of evidence and documentation, things were simple. Either something was real, or it wasn't. Either the evidence supported the claim, or it didn't. I couldn't control what my father had believed, or what my mother had chosen, or what my sister had built her life around. But I could control this. I could be accurate. I could be thorough. I could be honest. I could be exactly who I was, without condition or verification. I locked the vault door behind me when I left that evening. The mechanism clicked into place with a sound like finality. I walked through the library's reading room, past the tall windows that caught the last of the daylight. The light was golden, filtered, perfect for seeing things clearly. I thought about my father, about his journals and his suspicions and his need for proof. I thought about the will he'd written, the condition he'd imposed, the test he'd forced me to take. And I realized he'd given me something after all. Not love. Not approval. But a lesson I'd already known, that truth was more valuable than comfort, that evidence was more reliable than emotion, that the things we could prove were the only things we could trust. He'd been right about that, even if he'd been wrong about everything else. I left the library and walked home through the spring evening, past students and tourists and people living their ordinary lives. Nobody recognized me. Nobody knew my story. And that, I thought, was exactly how I wanted it. Not because I was hiding, but because I'd already proven everything that mattered. I was Isabel Monroe. I was my father's daughter. And I was, finally, completely certain of who I was.